Okay, the recording has started. So our topic for today is the cognitive science of religion. When scholars study religion from an evolutionary perspective, they often begin from one of two broad positions. One view is that religion is an adaptation. That is, it evolved because it helped groups to survive. Shared beliefs and rituals promoted cooperation, obedience to authority, and social cohesion. And groups with religion may have outcompeted groups without it. The second view, and the one associated with anthropologist Harvey Whitehouse, is that religion is better understood as a byproduct. In this view, religion was not directly selected for by evolution at all. Instead, religious ideas emerge naturally as side effects of mental capacities that evolve for other very practical reasons. Whitehouse does not deny that religions have powerful social effects. His claim is more modest, but also in a way more radical. He's saying religion and religious ideas do not need to be useful in order to arise. Minds like ours will generate religious ideas anyway. What Whitehouse calls wild religion includes beliefs in spirits, gods, ancestors, afterlives, sacred objects, purity rules, and invisible forces. These, I hear a echo of my own voice, so maybe you guys could mute while I'm doing this. At any rate, um, these are found across cultures and across historical periods, often emerging long before formal institutions or theology. And Whitehouse argues that this recurrence tells us something important, not about the supernatural, but about how human minds work. Humans seem naturally drawn to religious thought, and cognitive science gives us some clues as to why. One major factor may be the theory of mind. We are exceptionally good at inferring what others are thinking, feeling, and intending. This is an ability that allows us to cooperate, to deceive, to teach, and to form complex social relationships. But it also makes it easy to imagine minds that we cannot see at all, the minds of gods, spirits, ancestors, or the dead. Even young children often assume the dead still know and feel things. Another important factor is essentialism, which is the tendency to believe that people and objects possess an invisible inner essence that makes them what they are. This helps us categorize the world efficiently, but it also supports religious ideas about sacredness, relics, purity, and contamination. Hair, clothing, or bones can feel as if they carry part of a person's identity and give a tangible sense of connection to the spiritual world. Humans also exhibit what Whitehouse calls promiscuous teleology, which is a wonderful phrase, promiscuous teleology, the habit of seeing purpose everywhere. We evolved as tool makers and planners, constantly asking, what is this for? And this habit easily spills over into nature itself. Events, objects, and even suffering begin to feel as if they happened for a reason. So this makes beliefs in creator gods and cosmic purpose psychologically natural, especially early in development. Add to this hyperactive agency detection. Our ancestors survived by being highly sensitive to possible agents in their environment. Assuming an agent is present, even if mistaken, was safer than ignoring a predator or enemy. Spirits, demons, and gods fit this mental pattern perfectly. Religious ideas are also minimally counterintuitive. That is, they violate expectations just enough to be memorable, but not so much that they seem absurd. A ghost that walks through walls is strange but understandable. And that helps such ideas spread and reappear across cultures. And finally, religion taps into our social instincts. Even infants expect beings with extraordinary powers to dominate other beings. Supernatural agents are intuitively treated as social superiors, making gods feel like natural authorities long before doctrines, scriptures, or institutions develop. So far we've touched on two common ways scholars explain religion. The first is that it is an adaptation. That is, it evolved because it helped groups survive by promoting cooperation and social cohesion. The second is that it's a byproduct, that it emerges naturally from cognitive traits that evolve for other reasons, without religion itself being directly selected for. But there's a third perspective, which was discussed in the paper by Richard Sosa, which is one of the resources I posted, which helped tie the other two together. And that views religion as a complex system. Here, the individual cognitive traits I've just been talking about, such as mind reading, agency detection, are not themselves adaptation for religion, nor are they merely byproducts. They were originally shaped for survival, social coordination, and cooperation, but it's when those traits get combined into a system, the religious system as a whole, they can produce functional effects for the group. In other words, while the individual parts of religion weren't designed, the system itself may act like an adaptation, helping communities communicate, coordinate, and maintain cohesion. And scientists call this process exaptation, which is a trait evolved for one purpose is co-opted to serve a new role. So religion can show how evolution can assemble existing mental tools into a powerful adaptive social system. So to wrap up, whether we call religion an adaptation, an exaptation, or a byproduct, one thing is clear, it's deeply human. Our minds are built in ways that make religious thought seem inevitable. And social structures that emerge from it are surprisingly effective at shaping communities and behavior. Even though many underlying cognitive features of religion, like mind reading, agency detection, etc., are universal, the forms religion take across cultures can vary dramatically. Sometimes these differences lead to cooperation and cohesion, and other times they may contribute to conflict and tension between groups. So here's a discussion question to kick off, and then we can take it in any direction we want to. If so many cognitive features of religion are culturally universal, why is it that religious groups so often come into conflict with each other, given how much commonality that we have? How might our cognitive religious tendencies interact with our tribalism and social identity to produce these outcomes? And I see Diane had her hand up first and then Ken. You're muted, Diane, at my request earlier. Thank you.
Ken had his hand up first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ken and then Diane.
All right, go ahead, Diane.
Okay.
Well, what I was going to say is really not very substantial because I would just suggest that, of course, things that work well in a group are going to get used to reinforce tribalism.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's not much of a mystery about why something that's so socially useful would be a point of conflict between groups.
But it does require in a way that we focus on the surface differences between different religions and willfully, if you will, willfully ignore all the ways in which the religions are similar.
But that's true for all the things that divide us. Look at skin color,
Okay.
for heaven's sake.
Okay. Good point. Ken?
Well, we understand so much about religion if we look at it starting at, say, about 200 years ago, 250 years ago, up until that time, there was almost a one-to-one symbiotic relationship between a religion and a nation. And religion was effectively the social control glue that kept that nation together.
Hmm.
And so that explains the entire relationship between religion and tribalism. We developed a tribal paradigm, and religion was the functional behavioral uh, coalition of abilities that we have, both perceptual and intellectual, that serve that in social control. And interesting, I might just add this before I don't want to take too long. I might add this. As nations, besides coalescence being important for one group to defeat another, size was also a bit important. So we started getting larger groups. So what happened when we got larger and larger groups? We started getting multi-religious groups in one nation. The United States is a classic example. And so what did we develop as essentially an uber religion? And that's patriotism.
Hmm.
And it's very interesting that it turns out that very religious people also tend to be very patriotic. In China, we had an evolution of communism from a Marxist function into what is now a social control, patriotic kind of thing, because of course they now have a free market like we do, why they're making so much money. But so anyway, we've had this evolution of patriotism now in these very large multi-religious nations that have formed. But before that, it was one nation, one group, one religion, one group.
Chris?
Seems to
Here?
me that
Yep.
part of the reason that there's intergroup conflict it has to do with leadership, because religious leaders, part of their power is in their power to uh, tell others what the specifics of their religious beliefs are and what they need to do and how they need to do it. And so they have a role in creating that structure. And that power is based on, the difference between Lutherans and Presbyterians.
Hmm.
And so so I think part of that conflict has to do with not only the power structure, but also the beliefs. If you want people to have a strong belief in this system in which you have some power, um, or if there's other reasons for people to have a strong belief in it, then those specifics become very important.
Zafir? You're muted. Yep, there you
Yeah,
go.
it's good. I was just thinking that conflict's kind of the norm. As soon as you have groups, there's differences, there's conflict, there's us versus them. What religion allows to happen at a larger level is to increase the circle of us. So you don't have to have the same skin color, you don't have to have exactly the same family. If you have the same religious belief, you can be part of the in group. And then anyone who's out group, there's going to be conflict.
Let me redirect. I had probably, with the discussion question I chose to begin with, veered us off into talking about tribalism more than about wild religion. So let me ask you what your reactions are to Harvey Whitehouse's ideas about, and others of, Justin Barrett and other people besides Whitehouse, um, about religion as a byproduct, how the architecture of our minds give rise naturally to different types of religious beliefs, even if they're not necessarily adaptive. What do people think about that theory and the research supporting it? Does it seem, yeah, Hank, you're muted, Hank, just so you know.
Well, let's see. It's going to be difficult to stay with religion, but not the question of the the architecture of our minds. And it's hard to stay away from tribalism, even though we're going to try to stay sort of academically with this subject. but it's like, what is the human condition about? What is the architecture of our minds, and what happens when we get bigger in size rather than the small face-to-face groups? And so it's really about beliefs, and religion is one unique item that has been around in some form. Maybe either Boyd or Whitehouse talk about as the spirituality, or the small little groups that have these interesting ways of coping and dealing with suffering or problems, or that's the smaller wild religion groups. So it's really about so I'm thinking, so supernatural beliefs, whether they're in religion or somewhere else, or like eat more meat is very good for you right now, becomes a kind of well, it's a supernatural belief. So it's not about religion, but different ways that supernatural beliefs are manifested in history and now. So it's hard for me to just stay with religion, even though that is
Yeah.
a topic. Yeah.
Andy, I'll get you in one second. Allow me to share one thing from the White House chapter, which really struck me, in which he talked about, this is just sort of an example of how the way our minds work give rise to sort of naturally give rise to what might be called a religious belief. And he talked about how we can kind of imagine what it might be like to not be able to see, or not be able to hear, or not be able to have some other ability. But our own minds cannot imagine not having the mind itself existing. That we can't imagine our own mind not existing, which naturally gives rise to a belief that our mind will continue to exist even when our bodies no longer do. And so how that cognitive feature of our thinking naturally gives rise to a belief in either the soul or life after death in some way. I found the arguments for that pretty compelling and convincing. And of course, there are research with a lot of the research is with children to show that, children naturally, sort of intuitively, have some of these beliefs. Andy?
Yeah. So a minute ago, Steve, you asked if the byproduct approaches to explaining religion make sense to us.
Yeah.
So the major contrast here is with adaptationist accounts, I guess, right? So adaptationists tend to assume that for any given feature of humanity, say, that you can ask, what is it for, right? So what are hands for? What is the heart for? But what is our religiosity for? Well, I think the really important innovation in the byproduct theories is they're saying there is no direct answer to that. It's a secondary effect that it may not have a distinct function that benefits us. And I think that, so I find the byproduct approach much more compelling than the adaptationist approach when it comes to explaining religion. But then there's other approaches to explaining religion that I don't know quite how they fit in with adaptation, with byproduct accounts. But when we talk about mimetic selection, helping certain religious memes or memeplexes proliferate, we're at least talking about cultural evolution as a complement or adjunct to the biological evolution. If I came in a little late, Steve, and you were talking about biological adaptations that have side effects, right? That could result in. Did you, in preparing for this, come across how mimetic selection or cultural evolutionary accounts, how they dovetail? I mean, I know that Daniel Dennett's approach to explaining religion goes beyond the byproduct approach in the sense that he's really interested in mimetic selection and
Well,
and
not in the direct way. The paper that I posted by Richard Sosis, who's an anthropologist, I think, at UConn, which talked about a third view, which is that religion is religion as a integrated system. Once all these little intuitive parts are put together, then it creates a cultural system which is adaptive for a group. So that was kind of a third way to that's kind of close as I can get to what you're suggesting.
Well, and at least in Dennett's version of this, certain complexes of memes can evolve that aren't actually beneficial to their hosts at all, but that persist despite the fact that they often actually harm their hosts.
Good point. And that would lead us into a discussion about the downside or negative effects of religion, as well as whatever the positive side might be. Zephyr and then Hank.
Yeah, I think there's a temptation to think, what does it do for us when something's adaptive? What's its function?
Mhm.
There's the other side of it to adaptation as well, is they just simply have more children. It's an environment. Yeah, well, they do, It's an environment where generally, so in modern conceptions of religion, you're encouraged to get married early. The woman is encouraged to do exactly as she's told, and the man's in charge of the system. They're encouraged to have children. It's an environment where it's actually made safe to have children and for children to be networked, and there's other families. And a big chunk of the religious ideology is about bringing your children up to be, strong men and women of God. So there is actually, when I go along to church now, one of the things I notice a lot is how many large young families there are. It felt like it was the case when some of the ones I was visiting were, they kind of look like you guys. But yeah, now I'm seeing a lot of young families, and it's a real push in that direction. And the other side of it that I think of is, I always bang on about predictive processing and uncertainty. It's a system that gives you a very simple explanation for everything. So every challenge you have in life, every problem, every situation, the answers are simple. It's like, pray some more, read your Bible, and just, do as you're told. When you think about something rather, the conclusion for what you're supposed to believe is built into the process. So it's a reinforcing, very circular. So it breaks that sort of thing of like, I wonder if that's true. There's none of that going on whatsoever. That's the worst sin. That got me kicked out of the cult. So
Yeah.
that's my thoughts.
And the way that connects to the last thought you just shared, the way that connects to the byproduct idea is the idea of promiscuous teleology, the idea that we are intuitively inclined to see agency and intention and purpose, which relates to the need for meaning. That many religious people will say everything happens for a reason. That's a reflection of the intuition of promiscuous teleology. And if I can't discern the reason, that doesn't mean there isn't a reason. It just means I can't discern it, but it's still there, right? Which is at least in Christianity, is a very typical belief, I think. I'm going to go to I think Hank was next, and then Diane.
Yeah, so let me just run a few thoughts to see where I'm going with this. So I started off with thinking about our supernatural beliefs. Are they irrational beliefs? Are they adaptive, or are they a byproduct? Are the cognitively, affectively intuitive inclinations, or are they adaptive or byproducts? Or is how do you define irrationality compared to rationality? Maybe nowadays we might get close. I don't know what it is back then, but maybe supernatural beliefs are adaptive.
Hank, if you allow me to
But
jump
yeah,
in, the rationality or irrationality is an orthogonal dimension to adaptation or even byproducts. A belief can be irrational and adaptive, or it can be irrational and non-adaptive, or an irrational belief could be a byproduct or not a byproduct. So the rationality of a belief seems to me to be a totally separate dimension,
yeah,
unrelated to
right,
whether it's adaptive or not.
right. Thank you. But on a less theoretical level, we're capable of rational or irrational, and maybe supernatural is rational,
Okay.
whether it's a byproduct. And so I'm just taking it to the bigger picture uh, about whether these different beliefs, whether they're supernatural or like this is a gadget. Um, this is the part of the complication of being human. So I'm just thinking about outside the theoretical nomenclature and categorization, and see like it's not just religion, any institution.
Okay.
The peace program, President Donald Trump's peace program, is that rational or irrational? Anyways, that's where my thinking is.
All right. Diane and then Ken.
All this question about is it this or that makes me think, well, yeah, it's all of those things. Uh, different parts of it in different ways. Religion seems to serve so many functions so well that probably some of our adaptive capacities are in fact involved in it, and probably a lot of it's byproducts and a lot of it is social functions and et cetera, et cetera. I can't believe that there's a single simple explanation for the phenomenon of religion. It's just too big. It's too universal. And we also have to add in there social evolution, because it accretes things and changes over time. I mean, that
Diane, let me ask you a
2,000
question.
years of Christianity, it has gone into unbelievable different configurations.
Well, let me ask you a
And
question.
I'm sure
Diane.
that's true for Hinduism or any other ancient religion. So
So,
I'm not sure that either or is the right question. You might say, how does it function
mhm.
in social ways? What uh, makes it rewarding to individuals to have these beliefs? And they're quite various. I
Mhm.
mean, what relieves a Christian and what relieves a Buddhist may be very different kinds of things, but there are comforts rewarding, just plain learning, stimulus response learning, you might almost say, involved in it as well. It's a very, very successful enterprise. I think it's also very, very complex.
Let me frame the question this way to you, Diane, and other people as well. So, everybody, I think, would be in agreement that groups are going to need to develop some common belief system to cohere. And that is going to perhaps in terms of group selection, groups with a common belief system are going to perhaps perform better than groups that have less of a common belief system. But what the byproduct hypothesis raises for me is, but that group belief system didn't necessarily have to involve all these supernatural elements. It could have been a belief system totally, in our terms, non-religious, non-supernatural. But it didn't play out that way in terms of human history and evolution. The beliefs tended to be the supernatural beliefs. And that's where it seems to me the byproduct hypothesis really has its power. Why did the belief system turn out to have all these supernatural elements? The answer being because it's in our natural, intuitive way of thinking. Ken?
I can agree
Oh,
with
yeah.
those, but
Okay.
pardon me, Ken, can I
Yeah.
just say one more thing? A So many emotions are involved in religion that we haven't talked about at all. It's like it's a cognitive thing, but it
Hmm.
involves the moral emotions on the one hand. It involves awe. It involves and I think that tendency to experience awe is a very important part
Hmm.
of reinforcing religion, at least. It uses fear of punishment, generally speaking, and whether you believe in karma or you believe in hell,
Hmm.
uh, there, there's so it's really really complex. It's complete. It can make a whole civilization, so to speak.
Hmm.
I think it's almost on the level of language. Language is another thing that we have that, yes, has probably adaptation and also byproduct and social functions. I
Okay.
think it's, our accents are signals of what groups we belong to.
Hmm.
Uh,
Ken's been patiently waiting here. Go ahead,
Yeah,
anyway, that's a whole different tangent. Ken.
there is a limit to patience.
Ken.
Okay, the reason why religious beliefs are so fantastic is because one of the things they do is to diminish the power of the individual and the individual's desires so that he can fall under social control. And therefore, one fantasizes things that are far more complex than we could ever understand. They're so terribly powerful. That's how, and Dan made reference to that in my hosting of a discussion of awe some months ago.
Hmm.
Awe is something that makes you feel terribly diminished and how you need to cooperate with something much larger than yourself. And that's why, Steve, I think that can be clearly demonstrated. And just let me repeat, too, that the one-to-one correspondence between a religion and a group up until, a few hundred years ago, for thousands of years, clearly indicates that the function to is for the coalition of a group. Now, I did also want to I did want to mention that Anne and Zafir both talked about essentially the functions that religion provides, and they seem to provide two of them primarily. One is that it provides, again, individual emotional support. And how do you run your life? How do you feel about your life? And I imagine someone dragging a club through the savannas thousands of years ago looked at a body that was shrunk and covered with ants and asked himself, "Is that going to happen to me?" And so a shaman gave him the answer, and that was the beginning of religion. Um, then it provides also group cohesion. You get to hang out with buddies, which is something we very much evolved because of this grouping tribalism. And then of course it establishes the social control. It enforces a moral code, and a moral code is far more easily enforced if it comes from a large, fantastic creature who is immensely powerful, who's so powerful we can't even understand why. He would supposedly be all loving, but create a world in which there's so much hatred. We don't want to explain that because we can't. We're just
I'm going to repeat what
okay.
I said a second ago, Ken. I agree with everything you said. Everything you said is absolutely true, but it doesn't necessitate supernatural beliefs. It could have been a totally different belief system. So the real question, I think, about religion is not all of what you just said. That's a belief system. What's interesting about religion is why did religion turn out to be the belief system that did all those things with supernatural elements? It could have been a belief system without any supernatural elements at all. And the byproduct explanation for that is because that's the way our mind naturally works.
How could
Right?
our mind, no, may I
Yeah.
ask, please? How could our mind conceive of something that is so incredibly powerful that it had complete control over us and that we had to accept its rules unless it were supernatural in some fashion? I mean, how could we accept that?
Yeah, again, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying that a group could have developed a belief system about itself and the world that had no supernatural elements, and it would have performed the same social function as religion. But it doesn't.
I'm,
It
s-
didn't play out.
I'm asking, how could it have happened? How could someone accept an idea that is so terribly important unless it came from um, some creature and again, God is also somewhat, what's that word I'm looking for? Minimally counterintuitive. This minimally counterintuitive creature that is nevertheless a zillion times more powerful than us in order to make us feel weak and have to accept it. How else could we internalize it if that didn't exist?
All right. Hank, Zafir, and Andy.
Yeah, let's see. So many places we're all going, and it's quite fascinating to brainstorm this. But uh, I do like your reframe, Steve, of the question. What is it about religion that it's got so much stickiness, it's got so much traction? And I think uh, whether it's, well, a combination of adaptive and the other side of it, that to me is a fabulous, take 10 years maybe for us to go through it, but I don't know if we can stay with that a little bit, or is it just my direction? But this is what I think. It's a great question, and the other part is um, uh, I'm not sure I can give you a personal definition of religion outside what I've read and different points of view. So maybe if we didn't call it religion, but we called it the gamma phenomenon, without giving it all the cognitive biases we have. Why did this phenomenon, what made it so long lasting?
Yeah, and it's
So it's more of
a
yeah.
simple way to rephrase the question I'm asking is why this particular type of belief system? That's what I'm
Hmm.
asking. Zafir and
Right.
So the concept of supernatural um, is, to me, I think, probably a reasonably modern concept. Um, when things happen, we look for an explanation for it. And so you put a pigeon in a Skinner box, and the little grain pellets come out, and it's not actually attached to the button. And they'll be tapping that button, thinking that there's a connection between the button and the grain pellet, and then they'll reinforce that behavior. There's a volcano, there's an earthquake, there's a thunderstorm. Um, what logical explanations, if you had Stone Age knowledge of science and reason, could you come up for this?
Mhm.
Something caused it to happen. What can you do about it? What can you do to actually make sure it doesn't happen again? A good year or anything like this. So you develop rituals, little wee things, your lucky socks that make you play better in tennis or whatever it is. Um, when you sit down and talk to someone with supernatural beliefs, to them they're not really supernatural because God exists. God's actually a real creator, and the forces and the holy these are all real things to them. They're not supernatural beliefs in the way we understand things to be supernatural. Well, what do we understand supernatural to be? So that's my way of thinking about it. To
That's
me,
a
it's just a
really
set of beliefs that we think there's no physical thing in.
that's a great point in a way to rephrase what you just said. What is supernatural is in the eye of the beholder. You know, that if someone who believes God exists in their worldview, That's not a supernatural belief. It's natural. Yeah. Andy.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we talk about religions, we tend to think about extant religions. And it's worth remembering that for every religion that persists long enough to loom large in our minds, there are hundreds or thousands of experiments that basically collapsed. Now, some of those experiments would have been failed religions, right? Religions that somehow opted for sets of beliefs that were less sticky, less capable of seizing on human cognitive vulnerabilities and making a niche for themselves. But of course, there have been many belief systems, many groups, many philosophies that have also tried to create mass movements, and many of them fail, and they tend to fail at even higher rates, I think. Sorry, secular communes fail at higher rates than religious communes. They don't tend to last as long, and that seems to suggest that there's something about the religious belief systems that allow them, number one, to help the groups that hold them to persist longer. So Catholicism has lasted a hell of a lot longer than your average religion that winks out within a few years. But there's the groups that can last long, but some ideas just seem to keep coming back again and again. And I think Zafir's right. I think many historians of religion say that sort of big supernatural gods are more or less a product of the agricultural revolution, and that prior to that, sort of smaller, more spiritual, the concept of God changed pretty radically when cultures had to grow enormously in size to sort of accommodate the
There was no
changes.
monotheism before agriculture, was there? Before the agricultural religion, doesn't monotheism tend to, does it, no, Diane, I'm wrong about that?
No, you're right.
Oh, okay.
But I don't think it is unique to agriculture.
Yeah, I may be fuzzy on the details here, but I know that there are many pre-Abrahamic polytheistic religions where that kind of straddled the border of whether we would call them supernatural or not. Like they've got gods corresponding to ancestors, and for all we know, it's kind of just a metaphor for the memories and of our ancestors that they're talking about. So there's some ambiguity as to whether or not pre-Abrahamic religions should count as religion in the full-blooded sense. I don't know. The concept is vague.
Does Buddhism really have supernatural elements to it? I'm not so sure.
There's another nice example.
It doesn't really, does it?
Reincarnation is pretty supernatural.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ken's got something to say about Buddhism.
Along with karmic retribution, the idea that karma will be returned to you if you don't believe properly to other people. Retribution. This just happens to be an area of expertise for me. Karmic retribution, reincarnation, and merit.
Well, the karmic retribution might strike me. I might say that that's an irrational belief, but I'm not sure it's a supernatural belief.
Well, there has to be a karmic accountant somewhere in the sky who's going to note that you did something wrong and give it back to you.
Oh, so in other words, to believe in karmic retribution necessitates belief in a supreme being? Well, okay.
The supreme force of some sort, yeah, I would think.
Okay. Hank?
Yeah, I put this in the chat, and I think Zafir responded. But maybe we can think of if I was like a Harvey Whitehouse and I don't do a lot of writing and research, and I don't do all that, so I don't have the same clout that he got or anybody here, even though everybody. But still, I want to suggest that like a driving force might have something to do with uncertainty. And I think Zafir mentioned something like that before. And maybe we can think of it in terms of, well, let's say, philosophical movements. They come and they go. They get built upon. They get changed. Your question, Steve, is what is it about? Well, my question is, what is about uncertainty that contributes to religion, beliefs, the practices, the rituals, the variation, to be so sort of infinite in its existence compared to other collective forces or beliefs?
Uncertainty is anxiety provoking. People prefer periods to question marks, I think. Diane, and then Zafir.
Yeah, I want to come back to the emotional side of things. What are some of the aspects of religion that provide emotional satisfaction? I think one of them is ritual. Maybe, as we talked about in previous sessions, provides a group binding thing that makes use of costly appearances and so forth, which manufacture uniformity within the group. But also, religion provides extreme experiences of ecstasy, I think we need to call it, or what Durkheim talked about as effervescence of the group. And it channelizes those kinds of experiences in both the rituals and the effervescences into a feeling of union with the group, which is a very solidifying kind of thing. Just as you might say, sex is the binding thing in a marriage. Those kinds of extreme experiences are binding to the group.
I know the psychoanalytic take on that would be that that's a regressive yearning for the experience of merger with the mother that was the state we began our existence in. That would be one way to think about why the feeling.
Okay, now what's the evolution of that is?
Well, I did say that's a psychoanalytic, not an evolutionary explanation.
Right.
But we all begin existence in a state where we don't really have a separate sense of self. We're merged with our mother, and some psychoanalytic thinkers, particularly object relations theorists, would argue that at some level we all regressively yearn to return to that blissful, supposedly blissful state. I would prefer to describe it more as a lifelong dialectical tension, if you will, between a desire for individuation on the one hand and a desire for merger on the other. And we see that play out in relationships, and we see it play out in groups and in religious beliefs. To me, that's a fundamental sort of tension in life. But I can only explain that more through standard psychological theories rather than evolutionary theories per se. Anyhow, I'm getting us off topic, and I'm the leader, so that's terrible to do. Zafir?
Sorry.
That's right. Well, just responding to Hank, I think in a couple of months' time, I'm leading a discussion in what makes us vulnerable to cults, or what makes people vulnerable to cults and really bad ideas in general. So I'm going to talk a lot about uncertainty there. But one thing I noticed, so I visit, churches. I'm not always, but usually the groups that I visit are Christian, and it's because it's easier for me to understand and communicate with them. What they all have in common is they try to minimize uncertainty, and the predictive model. This is what a big part of the brain is trying to do: is minimize uncertainty. The more culty it is, the less likely they are to tolerate uncertainty. Uncertainty is definitely key in this topic.
Okay.
But can I add to Zafir what you're saying? It's I guess the question, to get back on track, even though I take us off track too, is about why has religion, or whatever we can have defined it as, and its development, its psychic, social, evolutionary, Why is it so long lasting? Why is that? We could say, and maybe it's in the literature, but why does religion help? I'm not asking you for anybody to answer. Help so steadily over thousands of years with uncertainty, even wild religion or more formal religions. That's
Yeah.
why is that
So,
place such a powerful force?
again, I'm only speaking to Christianity, but built into it is the mechanisms for growth. So it's a sin not to evangelize. And why wouldn't you? If you believed it was true. When I believed it was true, I thought seeking and saving the lost was the most important thing there is. Because if you're talking about everlasting, depending on your interpretation, everlasting torment or destruction versus paradise, a system where you're encouraged to have children and bring them up into the system, a system where you're not allowed to question, a system where you're actually reinforced, where uncertainty is minimized. I mean, it's the perfect formula for something that should last. And the only thing that goes against it is the beliefs of bonkers. If it wasn't for that, it would take over.
I always think about it, and I've mentioned this book in previous meetings, but I always think about Eric Fromm's book, Escape from Freedom, which he wrote in the aftermath of World War II and the Holocaust, trying to understand what happened in Germany. But I think it applies to individuals as well. And the central thesis of that book, and it's been 50 years since I read it, but what my memory tells me is that the central thesis is that people experience freedom. Many people experience freedom existentially as extremely anxiety provoking. And they seek to, because freedom also implies unpredictability. And so they escape from that freedom by choosing an ideology, be it a political ideology like Nazism or a religious ideology like fundamental Christianity, that they escape from freedom into certainty, I think. Anyhow, Ken?
Okay, I did want to first of all make a quick response to Andy, but unfortunately he's gone. And I just
Yes,
wanted to
he said
note
he
that he
had to
talked.
sign off. Yes.
Oh, it's too bad. But let me just mention, just to respond to what he said, and that's he talked about religions that collapsed, the thousands of religions that collapsed years ago. It wasn't the religions that collapsed, it was the groups that collapsed because those religions, for whatever reason, did not provide sufficient coalition or group numbers for those two reasons. And so the groups collapsed. Number two, I just want to mention uncertainty. That goes back to what I said. One of the two functions of religion is to provide personal support. And one thing about personal support is, again, not knowing is frightening, and so it reduces anxiety by providing certainty, and
Hmm.
that's part of the personal support. There's two parts: the personal support section of religion, and then the group cohesion, social control part. That's it. Somebody else now.
Hank?
Yeah, it's really a good observation, Ken. So let me again go back to I guess I have a more modern, not compared to anybody, but a modern perspective on individual and social support. So from my life experience and my work as right on on the front lines as a psychotherapist, I would say that now how many might agree or not, I don't know, but the social support and the individual support have the purpose of allowing us to cope better with uncertainty rather than setting up these defenses or protective devices to wipe out the possibility of uncertainty. And somehow religion uh, does some kind of decent job because it's lasted so long, whatever all the variables involved. But they are about uncertainty, and the group supports us. But why, and on evolutionary level, do we? Oh, hold on. So in Buddhism, we're talking about the clinging phenomenon, and And the escape from uncertainty is not just Eric Fromm or other philosophers or thinkers, but in Buddhism, they have a whole other belief system, but you don't want to escape from certainty. You want to just do the right things, the right paths that help you deal with uncertainty, which maybe I will define today as suffering.
I think we may be
So
being
that is,
we may be being a bit unfair to religion and sort of tarring it here with a very broad brush. I think that what we might in Christianity we might talk about more evangelical Christianity, um, probably um, has a much lower tolerance for uncertainty than what we might describe more liberal religious traditions. So, and that may be true in other faith traditions as well. So there's probably sort of a continuum or a bell curve of tolerance for uncertainty, even within people that are quite religious. I think certain more less evangelical, less fundamentalist Christian traditions are have a better tolerance for saying, well, we don't. There's I'm not sure how to put it. Just a higher tolerance for gray rather than everything being black and white, including morally. May make sense what I'm saying? Yeah.
yeah,
Education.
Steve,
Those
but
who
I
are,
wanted to go ahead, Ken.
just very briefly, those who are less educated tend to be more certain, to provide more certainty, to be tolerant of uncertainty,
Yeah.
because it's more difficult for people with less education to come up with answers by themselves.
Is there
Whereas
some
more
research that is there a correlation between fundamentalist belief and level of education?
I think
Empirical
so.
question. I don't know.
Not the leaders.
Hmm.
But Steve, can I get
Yeah.
back to the again? I've kind of now I feel like I have this fixed point is about why has whatever we call religion done such a good has lasted so long? Not like who's better at it, who's worse. There are pros and cons to any organized belief system. So religion is just some theologists call it religion is organized theology. That's one. I forget who that was. But again, I'm back to, and I'm going to stay with this from my own level of private thought. What makes it so has it such
Let's
longevity?
Hank, broaden the question to why does any belief system last? We can talk about
Yeah,
we can talk about secular belief systems. Let's list some.
yeah,
Communism, capitalism,
right.
list a secular belief system. Some last and some don't. So I would just say not as why does religion last, but why do some belief systems last and prove enduring, secular or not, and others don't? Off the top of my head, it must
Well,
be because they perform some function that's useful, I'm guessing.
well, I would just
Yeah.
say on that, I'm sorry, Zafir, but
That's right.
if we talk about how each a belief system in the group's mind or the let's say Jung's collective unconscious, there's an agreement somewhere unspoken uh, uh, that this thing is a good thing that's going to help us survive. Somehow, this whatever
It
the
just
different
and that's
theorists
that's
talk
true for
about.
that's true for secular belief systems too. Capitalists,
Yeah,
people that
yeah,
right? It's a good thing that's
right,
going to
but
help us. Communists would say
yeah, but
communism is a good thing that's going to help us.
well, maybe they have certain religious principles or factors involved, but I guess I'm going to religion has something different than all these others. In addition to they are organized, and it's a game of telephone. A lot of stuff is oral, and belief systems are oral.
Well, yeah,
Most of
what the religious belief
yeah.
systems add are these supernatural elements that are not in the secular
Well,
belief systems.
that's I don't know that, but that's our question here. I
Yeah,
think somebody brought up about supernatural, whatever that means.
right.
I think
Yeah.
Zafir, you said it's supernatural. May not. There was no such thing as supernatural. It's like, how does it happen? Well, if we do a rain dance, if you're a Native American, whenever they got with that, that might help with getting some rain.
Well, I
Now,
would
is that supernatural to them? I don't
But
know.
you could venture a definition of supernatural. I don't, what would I say? Supernatural is something
Yeah,
which is non-evidence based, perhaps. I don't know. Yeah, Zafir.
Zafir's
Go ahead.
looking
So,
at it.
yeah, yeah. Well, when you're forming a hypothesis, you're guessing at first, and like I've got models trying to understand aspects of cognition, and as I read more and more evidence, this gets refined. So I don't think it's about supernatural or not supernatural, or religious or not religious. I think it's about dogmatic or flexible. So a mindset that actually allows itself to be revised by evidence is flexible. Something that's more dogmatic is this is the way we do it. This is the way we've always done it. This is the way my grandfather did it. So I've when I was in Ireland, people were going to church, but they didn't believe it. It was just what they did. It was part of the national identity of being an Irish Catholic. Um, and I have dealings with some of my customers now who do things in remarkably antiquated ways that do not match the evidence, but it's just the way they've always done it. His beliefs aren't supernatural, but the similarities. And on how it persists, well, is it beneficial? Is it beneficial to be part of that group? What's the cost benefit ratio? To what degree is it being enforced? And what's the reproduction rate? How many children are you required to have? Are you required to go out and get more members? I don't think we actually need a complicated explanation. It's just a belief like any other beliefs. Some are very resistant, some not so much.
Well, you pointed out something I think is very important, which is maybe at the risk of gross oversimplification, the difference between, if not a secular and religious belief system, at least I could say a difference between a religious and a scientific belief system, which is that the hallmark of a scientific belief system is that beliefs are provisional.
Mm,
That is what makes us that, right? But and the hallmark of a religious belief system perhaps is the opposite, that the core beliefs are not provisional, right?
yeah.
Right. And what's interesting is that both of those belief systems, at least since the Enlightenment, right? Both of those belief systems have proved pretty robust and even though they're in that sense about whether beliefs are provisional or not, they're diametrically opposite from each other. Yeah, Diane, I can see Diane wants to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I think it really is important to go back to the supernatural
Mhm.
idea, that it really isn't religion unless you have something to worship or feel reverence for, and so forth, which means that that being or state or whatever is something that is beyond human capacity. Now, whether that's, ghosts passing through walls, or whether it's a creation of from nothing, creation of the world or whatever, which is a typical kind of belief. Most of the primitive religions have beliefs about the creation of the world, for example. So it's belief in a force that's beyond that of humans. If you don't have that, then you might have orthodoxy. This is the way we think as a group, or this is the way we practice. But you won't have the awe, you won't have the devotion, you won't have the
Well, you can have awe in the face of something natural. I mean, I could look at the Grand Canyon and feel awe. But Diane, I think you're absolutely on target in what you're saying, and I couldn't agree more. When I was a freshman in college, I don't remember a lot of my freshman in college courses, but I did take a course called Introduction to Religion. And it was not a survey of religion. It was a course that attempted to answer the question, what is the essence of religion? What do all religions have in common? And I remember at the end of the course, the professor gave us his opinion. And his opinion basically boiled down to what all religions have in common is a belief in something transcendent. And that was
yes.
his word. Transcendent to what? Transcendent to natural human experience. and
Yes.
transcendent might be a synonym for supernatural. So ever since that been a long time since I've thought about that course, but that is what I think you're saying, in agreement with that professor's conclusion. I agree with you. Yeah.
And I think that's more or less what I was trying to say too.
Hank and Ken, and then we may want to talk about wrapping up, but go ahead.
Let me see. I want to bring us back to what was your comment about the? Oh, sorry. What did you say, Steve, about the science? What is that? It's
I said
around
that
the
the hallmark
flexible.
of science is that beliefs are provisional, and
Yeah,
perhaps the hallmark of religion is
yeah,
that at least some
that's
beliefs are
right.
not provisional.
Yeah, I don't know why I blocked that out, but I did. So look what's going on now in this country in terms of the attitude towards science,
Hmm.
which we could say is the attitude that beliefs are provisional.
Hmm.
Now that's happening. We're seeing it as being manufactured. It's a steady machine. I mean, it's been going on forever.
Hmm.
But the basic thing, you don't want beliefs to be provisional because that activates a sort of existential dread of uncertainty, which means when am I going to die? Not am I going to die, but when am I going to die? And if you see people who a little have different kinds of moderate mental health problems, a lot of death anxiety or kinds of anxiety that involves predicting the negative,
But
with a
even if you,
negativity
Hank,
bias.
it's interesting. It depends on how you framed it. If you said to people who seemingly are anti-scientific and opposed to the idea of beliefs being provisional, if you said, would you be interested in the current way we treat cancer to be the definitive and only way, and it can't ever get any better, so we're never going to revise our beliefs about how to treat cancer? Most people would say, "Oh no, don't do that. Keep working on it. Come up with better
Well,
come up with better
not
cures."
if I, yeah, but Steve, what if I was I know a bit about Christian Science because I've worked with some people,
Well,
so I've studied about it. They don't go for that.
yes, okay.
You know how many people die? They don't keep a record. So I'm saying there's Christian Science, we could say, is just a manifestation of of our needing things to be fixed
Okay.
to deal with uncertainty. That
You're right. That would be an exception to what I just said for sure.
well,
And
Well, just very briefly in reaction to this, what you just said about medical advance with cancer, isn't that what Robert Kennedy is saying about our medical situation? I mean, isn't he saying stop to some extent?
I
But
hadn't
He's
thought about
he's
that.
pretending to say it.
pretending to say, okay, um, religion that collapsed. Oh boy, now I forgot what I was going to say. I'm so
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
Well, if people are interested, we're about 12:15. We can talk a little bit about future topics. I have some, and we do have some already in the hopper. But next month, Rob and his daughter are going to lead a discussion about. Oh, you
Just
want to? Okay,
before
go ahead, Ken, and then
we
I'll
do
do this. Go ahead.
apologize very briefly. Something I did want to mention. Could I suggest why I believe it's necessary for a very transcendent, powerful, fictitious creature to be believed? And let me do that by a picture. I'm going to share a cartoon, if I may, very briefly. I hit the share button. I'm going to get a kick out of this, I'm sure. This is a cartoon by Gary Larson, and it shows God at his computer. And there's a man walking under a piano which is being lifted up into a building, and his finger is hanging over the smite button, press or do not smite.
Might.
And it's the understanding of that particular kind of power individual that forces an individual to agree to and behave with the Moor, the current Moors.
Okay.
I wasn't too frivolous with that.
All right. No, that's a funny that's a funny cartoon. So next month, Rob and his daughter are going to lead a discussion about monsters and the evolutionary psychology of why we tend to believe in monsters. Zafir, if you're willing the month after that to do the one on cults, that would be ideal.
Yeah.
A
Yeah, I'm
couple-
gonna. I was just going to say it'll be focusing on the on vulnerability to cults is probably the focus. So it'll be a little bit related to today,
Yes.
but focusing on the extreme end.
Yeah. I'm sorry that Andy left early because I was going to ask Andy at some point. He's written a paper and done some thought about what he has called, or at least other people have called, the mattering instinct, the need to matter, which is maybe also somewhat related to the topic of religion. And I was going to ask Andy at some point if he might be willing to do that. But I wrote down 10 topics that we've never talked about before, which is not easy to do because we've been doing these for 3 years at least. And a lot of the major topics in evolutionary psychology we have had a session on. That doesn't mean we can't revisit them, but I tried to think of topics that we've not talked about, and I'm just going to read you the topics, and I'm going to probably post them in Hilo and as something we can think about. So here's my random, in no particular order, list of topics. Procrastination. And by the way, I did do a little bit of Googling and determine that there is some scholarly literature on each of these topics. Procrastination, boredom, why do humans collect things, the evolution of time perception, why does time seem to go faster when you get older, dominance versus prestige, two different paths to status, and who chooses what and why. Why do we love games and play as adults? The evolutionary roots of a midlife crisis. Midlife crises are real, and there's actually some theory, it's called life history theory, that explains why midlife crises tend to occur. The next one maybe is timely in light of some things that are going on politically. The evolutionary psychology of legacy, the need for legacy, and does it relate to symbolic immortality in some way? And then the 10th was the evolutionary psychology of embarrassment. So I will list these, and we can cherry pick and choose, and people are willing, more than able to suggest topics of your own. But I was trying to come up with things other than the usual suspects that, we've already talked about in any number of ways. And Ken, I know you have a topic you want to do as well.
Yes, I was just going to mention that, I have been doing a little bit of research on scientific basis of, ideas for countering our tribal inclinations with some scientific basis. I've been looking at that.
That would be good as well. And anybody's free to suggest a topic at any time, and we don't have to do any of these. But again, I was just trying to generate a list of topics that we've never touched on as far as I could tell, looking back at what we've talked about. So that's what I came up with. All right, and I'm really looking forward to next month, Rob, with you and your daughter on the topic of monsters and things that go bump in the night, because that's a really interesting topic. And my guess is, just like in religious beliefs, there's probably a lot of cross-cultural, universal types of monsters that occur in every culture. Am I right about that?
Yeah, also it's a response to contemporary anxieties.
Right.
And those change over time. So they get repurposed
Right.
over and over.
If you look at the 1950s horror movies, they were often about having to do with our fear of nuclear catastrophes occurring and things.
Or communism.
And communism. All right. Well, then why don't we plan at least the next 2 months, if that's okay? We'll do monsters next month and cults Zafir will lead us in talking about cults the month after that, and then we'll go from there. Okay? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Yep. Have a good rest of your week.
Cheers. Great discussion.
Bye-bye.
May the force be with you, folks.
Yes, an appropriate.
Or
appropriate
what's his name? Mel Brooks. May the Schwartz be with you.
Take care. Bye-bye.